Don't touch that remote. I know it's heartbreaking to have your favorite shows preempted, but look what you're getting instead. Me! And a whole truckload of mindless violence and wanton property damage. Everything that makes TV great.
Batman is undoubtedly the most popular DC Comics character. In this video we will see some of the most disturbing moments that the character has had throughout its history since 1939. If you are interested in seeing a similar video but with another character, don't forget to comment any other idea you want to see. Level 1. To begin with, we have what is probably the best-known Batman comic to date, The Killing Joke. In the late 80s, Alan Moore shows us a more twisted aspect of the Joker. This comic book marks the origin of the crime clown and his first encounter with Batman in Gotham City, as well as the torture that James Gordon and his daughter Barbara received, the latter to the point of being paralyzed by the Joker. Eventually it would be adapted with an animated movie, which was not as well received as the comic, arguing that many things were not adapted very well. The end of the comic is one of the most ambiguous, as many theories were created about it, since Alan Moore refused to talk about it. The last page of the comic is this one, and although it is normal that many have not understood what happens, thanks to Grant Morrison, who has written multiple comics of the character, we can have a clear idea of what Alan wanted to do. This was his interpretation. No one gets the end, because Batman kills the Joker. That's why it's called The Killing Joke. The Joker tells the killing joke at the end. Batman reaches out and breaks his neck, and that's why the laughter stops and the light goes out, cause that was the last chance at crossing that bridge. And Alan Moore wrote the ultimate Batman and Joker story. He finished it. Morrison's interpretation was nothing new either. There were many theories that suggested the same. However, now it is clearer, even in the animated adaptation, we're knowing this, it is clearer that Batman really kills the Joker. Just as in The Killing Joke, we are shown the origin of the Joker. In Batman Year One, we are shown the origin of Batman during his first days as a vigilante. During this arc of the comics, Lieutenant James Gordon arrives in the city of Gotham after a 12-hour train ride. He can see the city from its foundations. A dirty city, which is determined to stay that way. He hates what he sees. Bruce Wayne returns to his hometown by plane, sees a general, deceptive plane, where the enemy is not seen. Gordon encounters the reality of the street, makes a reconnaissance of the people who must watch over order, those responsible for security. In contrast, Wayne explores the street life, camouflaged to avoid being recognized, mingling with the people of the most dangerous neighborhoods. He begins to design his plan of action, but something is missing. It is not until after his first raid, where he almost ends up dead, that Bruce has the revelation. As he bleeds on a couch in his father's former study, a bat bursts through the glass to land on Thomas Wayne's bust. Batman is born that night at the same time Gordon is beaten up by his colleagues to exact revenge almost immediately. Unbeknownst to them, Batman and Gordon will create a symbiotic relationship, destined to perpetuate over time. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood of Robinson Park, a Selina Kyle, inspired by the Bat, begins her journey as Catwoman. Throughout its publication, Batman has had many crossovers with different franchises, such as Batman vs. Predator, which in its time was one of the biggest events in comics, since the fact that Batman was tasked with defeating the best hunter in the galaxy was a historic event. There are also other collaborations with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which has been one of the best known, as the Dark Knight has crossed paths on more than one occasion, and others less known, like Batman with Spawn or Hellboy. The best known is probably the crossover with Marvel, in Amalgam Comics. During this legendary event with DC and Marvel, we can see Batman face hand-to-hand against Captain America, or how he and Wolverine end up merging, creating one of the most impressive heroes of all, Dark Claw. In Batman Nightfall, Bane not only tested himself physically, but devoured as many books as he could, building his brain as much as his body. The prison that contained him eventually used him as a test subject for the chemical venom, and defying all odds, he survived the experiments. The fascinating thing about Bane was that, for all his power and intellect, he still suffered from a fear of bats, haunted since childhood by a hideous bat in his deepest dreams. With a little help, Bane broke free from prison and soon learned of Batman, the men who ruled Gotham City, a city ruled by fear. Bane saw Batman as the embodiment of the bat that terrorized him in his sleep for all those years. To destroy him would be to destroy that true fear. Destroying Batman, the man no one else had ever bested, would prove his superiority. Gotham would be his. This scene would become one of the most iconic, as it shows that Batman can be overcome physically and mentally, showing a vulnerable side of the character. This theory says that all of the villains in Gotham City are reflections of Batman in some aspects. For example, where Batman decided to dedicate his life to train himself and fight evil, Joker went the opposite route. Joker gave in to all his dark urges and impulses. He allows himself to run free without any inhibitions. He represents what Batman could have done if his mind wasn't disciplined enough to deal with witnessing the murder of his parents and becoming a hero. Two-Face is what Batman would be if the struggle between having dual identities became too much. Like Bruce, Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face involved a horrific moment. Another example is Mr. Freeze, who is devoid of emotions. He suffered tragedy when his wife became ill and he lost everything that mattered. Batman rarely shares his emotions with others. If Batman didn't allow himself to interact with those in the Bat family, he could easily become as cold as Mr. Freeze. The last one is Ra's al Ghul. When Ra's first approached Batman about being his heir, he talked a good talk. Batman was curious about his plan to save the world. Both believe they can form an empire to rid the world of the unworthy. Batman has started Batman Inc. and is trying to force his ideals on other nations. He may not go to the drastic means that Ra's al Ghul would, but he does believe he knows what is best for the world. If Batman didn't have as much patience as he does, and if he didn't believe there was good in everyone, he could easily go the route Ra's does. One of the peculiarities of the Flashpoint timeline is that in this reality, Bruce Wayne is dead and it is his father, Thomas, who wears the Batman suit. In this reality, in the alley where Bruce's parents originally died, this time only the young Bruce Wayne dies. The boy's mother, Martha Wayne, is not able to bear the loss and cuts her face to always smile, thus creating the Joker of Flashpoint. As for Thomas, he decides to become a vigilante and fight crime in search of revenge for his son, and does so as Batman. It must be said that Thomas Wayne's Batman is much more violent than Bruce's, and he does kill. A clear example is that Thomas Wayne, wearing Batman's cape, killed Bruce's killer. A Death in the Family was an arc published in 1989 that set an unprecedented event in DC Comics, as the company put a dynamic phone call to decide the fate of Jason Todd, the second Robin, who was hated by practically every person who read the comics. In the end, the audience decided that Jason Todd should die and was beaten to death by the clown of crime with a crowbar. The choice to kill a young boy at such a young age in such a brutal way became controversial at the time, which is why the publisher brought back the character many years later under the pseudonym Red Hood, one of the most popular and bloodthirsty members of the Bat family, who is even the central antagonist of Batman Arkham Knight. This comic is another of the darkest points that Batman has had, because after this event, Bruce Wayne changed his mentality. This comic would be adapted twice, once in 2010, in the movie Batman, Under the Red Hood, and the other in 2020, in an interactive animated film, in which we can choose the fate of Robin, as it happened in 1989 during its publication. Level 2. As we just saw, people hate Jason Todd's Robin. He was a wilder, more rebellious Robin than Dick Grayson, which the fans and staff grew to dislike with time. In an infamous sequence in the A Death in the Family storyline, the Joker beat Jason near to death with a crowbar, then blew up the room he was in. Batman arrived in time to see the explosion, and the comic ended, leaving the cliffhanger ending. The vote in question followed, and in the next issue, Jason was dead. It has been claimed that the vote was pure theater, and that Jason Todd was to die no matter what. The only evidence of an alternate comic is a page published in Batman Annual number 25. This issue, which was related to Jason's 2000s return, shows Batman with Jason, who here is still alive. There's also another page that shows Batman after the explosion with Todd, saying thank God, he's alive. The death of Martha and Thomas Wayne was the moment that forever defined the life of their son, Bruce. Although many fans remember this scene, not many know the identity of the killer. It would be 9 years after the scene was published that the mysterious criminal would have a name, in issue 47 of Batman, where he would face a dangerous assailant named Joe Chill. After his fight with the criminal, Batman tried to frighten him enough to abandon his life of crime, but instead asks for help from other bad guys, who learn that he was the one who created the Gotham vigilante, so they take down Chill before he can reveal Batman's identity. Later, some parts of Bruce Wayne's past would be changed, as well as some versions where Joe Chill is not responsible, or parodies such as Teen Titans Go, where Robin himself is the one who kills Bruce Wayne's parents. In the comic book The Other History of the DC Universe number 4, we follow Renee Montoya, known under the pseudonym of The Question. At the end of her investigation, the character reveals the existence of one of the darkest theories about the Gotham universe. It's no secret Gotham is the city of crime, villains, thugs, and other rogues and knights of industry. Montoya's theory talks about the creation of the city that would be directly related to Batman's most iconic villains and the fact that the Dark Knight would be constantly at war with them, relentlessly, arguing that this cycle would be quite intentional. For Renee Montoya, Gotham cannot exist without the Joker, Penguin, Mystery Men, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, and all the others. Just as she cannot exist without Batman. So, according to her, the bad guys would receive preferential treatment by being sent to Arkham Asylum, facilitating their release through treatment or for other reasons. She also supports the idea that families sometimes pay dearly for these monsters of human nature to be free. There have been a total of 3 times Gotham City has been destroyed. The first instance is perhaps the lesser known of the 3. The story begins with a number of abandoned buildings being mysteriously demolished. The perpetrator of these crimes is an individual called the Destroyer, whose motives aren't as simple as a desire for destruction. The next and perhaps biggest event to bring Gotham City crumbling down was the Cataclysm earthquake. The magnitude 7.6 earthquake tore through the city, making it unsafe to live in. In response, the U.S. government evacuated the civilian population. Those who chose to stay, or were unable to leave, were sealed in when the government blew all the bridges leading into the city. After this, they declared Gotham to no longer be a part of the United States, turning it into a no-man's land. As a result, the criminal underworld rose up to take total control of the city. The third and final time Gotham was totally destroyed was in the New 52 origin story for the Dark Knight. In this tale, the Riddler was the sole mastermind behind Gotham's demise, creating a lawless urban environment a lot like No Man's Land. By cutting off the city's power, he transformed Gotham into his own personal playground. With the government unable to do anything, the job fell to Batman. When a military strike force eventually did enter the city, Riddler used buildings like dominoes, destroying one after another in a chain to trap his prey. Batman eventually did stand up to him publicly. He trapped the Dark Knight in a parking lot that he had turned into a lion's den. Eventually, Gotham's heroes restored power to the city, allowing the rebuilding to commence. Bruce Wayne is a character that, despite having a great intelligence, has many mental problems due to the situations he has gone through. Bruce's parents are killed when Bruce was just a child and, naturally, he has scars. People have different ways of dealing with the pain of grief. But Bruce has found it appropriate to sublimate his grief by choosing to be a nocturnal loner and assuming the persona of a bat to scare off criminals. This is sign enough that the grief has left him with thoughts of maladjustment, social isolation, and other conditions. The superhero is a melancholic man, perhaps because of lingering emotional stress resulting from the severe psychological shock received at a tender age. He is haunted by the horrible memories of his tragic past with each passing day. These prove that he has been left with post-traumatic stress disorder. This has also helped him become a stronger being, ready to fight evil. Bruce enters a severe phase of depression after the death of his parents, and although he has tried to recover by forcing himself to fight crime, everything about him is a classic symbol of depression. He is the ultimate melancholic, obsessed with everything that represents darkness. His costume is black. He has chosen a nocturnal creature as his spirit animal, and his favorite time throughout the day is night. He has a dejected personality and finds it difficult to connect with people. This could be attributed to his occupation and lifestyle, which are unique and strange. Or, this could also be due to his reluctance to become emotionally attached to someone, for fear of losing them. It is not only his attachment problem, but also other personality traits such as being a loner, expressing little emotion, all suggest that he has a schizoid personality disorder. Lastly, Batman has obsessive-compulsive disorder. He may not show the classic signs of the condition, but he is definitely obsessed. He is mostly preoccupied with his enemies, in particular the Joker, which explains the Joker card in his Batcave. Damian Wayne is the biological son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, who would eventually become Robin. Damian is a very different Robin than his predecessors. Damian is proud, arrogant, egotistical, condescending, rude, and unafraid to voice his opinions. He is somewhat temperamental, if not outright violent, when confronted by his enemies. He is shown to be committed to the code of the League of Assassins, which, unlike those of his father, allows and encourages the murder of enemies. The way in which Damian was conceived would generate controversy, as there are two versions, the first where it is shown that Talia drugged Bruce in order to have sex and have a child with him, against Bruce's will. And in another version, it would eventually be explained that it was actually consensual between the two, and Talia would hide Damian's birth from Bruce until he was older. Even though Damian is not the most popular Robin among fans, he has become one of the most important characters in any Batman story in recent years. Between 1940 and 1960, an intense anti-comic book campaign developed in the United States, driven by citizens who considered that these magazines were not only a bad influence on their children, but were also responsible for an increase in juvenile delinquency. A turning point came when psychiatrists and psychologists joined the campaign. Its leader was Frederick Wertham, a German-born psychiatrist who accused comic books of damaging the minds of children because of their content loaded with violence, sex, horror, and racism. Some psychiatrists and psychologists followed Wertham's approaches, although others considered them wrong since there was no scientific evidence on the damage caused by the comics in the mind of the children. The intervention of the specialists in mental health was essential for the anti-comics campaign, and they were quoted by the press, radio, television, and even the United States Senate, who summoned some of them as witnesses in sessions held to analyze the relationship between comics and children's behavior. For this reason, Wertham and the specialists in mental health are seen as responsible for the fall suffered by the comic book business at the end of the 50s, including Batman. Level 3. The year was 1966, when Adam West's Batman series aired on television in Japan and quickly became a hit. To capitalize on this, Shonen King magazine contacted Jiro Kawada and asked him to create a related manga. Kawada agreed and received Batman comics and writings to study, but he felt that some parts would not appeal to Japanese audiences, so he opted to rewrite them, sometimes from scratch, so the manga had little or no relation to the comics that inspired it. Thus Batman Shounen King was born. In this version of Batman, he is presented as a talented detective like his counterpart, but the stories are more science fiction related, with Batman using powerful technology to defeat villains. In Batman Urban Legends number 20, Batman fans were surprised when a new universe with a more Lovecraftian feel was introduced. Batman is written as a monster hunter, waging war against the creatures that lurk in Arkham, and trying to resist the corruption that humans bring to this world. The end of the story reveals that, in this universe, the Joker is a kind of Eldritch deity, ruling a world opposite to Arkham. Now known as the Laughing One, he has a cult of monsters trying to bring him to this new world. This version of the Joker is one that has always been a god. In this version of the Joker, it is unknown how much power he actually has, but he is described as a virtually immortal deity. Mr. Mxyzptlk is nigh omnipotent and can do virtually anything imaginable. He can manipulate anything and everything under him. This powerful character was tricked by the Joker to give him 99% of his power. And according to him, this was the reason. The Joker had made his career out of making Batman batty. So, I figured, just for laughs, what if I gave him my powers and set him loose on your world? You know, see how somebody else would do at my job. Look, I'm not an idiot. I planned on giving him only a little of my power. Like 1%. That's when I learned that just because the Joker is insane, doesn't mean he isn't smart. The Joker tricked me into revealing my secret name, which every imp has, and in doing so he took 99.9% of my power. Okay, so maybe I am an idiot. There's no further explanation on why this works. However, this triggered the Superman, Emperor Joker storyline that saw him remake all reality in his twisted image. Heroes were converted into villainous characters, villains became the Joker's playthings, and Batman became the Joker's personal toy to torture and kill every day, then resurrect him to repeat the process. It was the most power the Joker ever had, and he nearly destroyed reality with it. His power was not meant to be used so brazenly, but his broken mind did not perceive, nor care that he was breaking the universe. As part of the Infinite Crisis saga, which began to mark the history of DC Comics during 2005, the then head of the publishing house, Dan Didio, had an idea that marked his entire stay in the company. As the concept of crisis is synonymous with important deaths, from what was the original saga during the 80s, Didio thought it would be best to kill Dick Grayson. Developed during Infinite Crisis number 6, an issue featuring how the villain Superboy Prime rampages through heroes and villains, including Grayson. But as everyone who read that story knows, the attack on Nightwing is interrupted. In the printed pages, Superboy Prime goes directly against Nightwing, but Connor Kent, the Superboy who emerged during the story of Superman's death, intervenes and ends up sacrificing himself to save his best friend. Although many never forgave Connor's death, the change in the final decision was the work of scriptwriter Jeff Johns, editor Eddie Berganza, and cartoonist Phil Jimenez, who managed to overturn Didio's decision. They all felt that Grayson's death was not the right thing to do. Much more than Superman and Batman, Nightwing is the soul, he's the backbone of the DC universe. His death would have devastated everyone and created rifts for the entire universe. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker was the epic continuation of the Batman Beyond animated series, and it came very close to getting a sequel, which was ultimately cancelled. Batman Beyond, a follow-up to Batman, the animated series, was set in the future and saw an older Bruce Wayne acting as a mentor to the new Batman, Terry McGinnis. While the series mostly featured all new villains, Return of the Joker brought back Batman's ultimate nemesis. However, it isn't the real Joker, as the clown prince of crime encoded himself into a microchip with genetic technology, which was planted on Tim Drake, the former Robin.
My God. Oh, I never get tired of that.
Though Return of the Joker was the perfect end to the series, Bruce Timm, who created its story and developed Batman Beyond, had planned to make a sequel. The follow-up wasn't going to be focused on the Joker again, though. Instead, the sequel, it would have been revealed that Catwoman is Terry McGinnis's mother. As the story unfolded, Terry would have learned that he's actually a clone of Bruce Wayne and that Selina Kyle was the one who cloned him. While the Batman Beyond series continued in comic book form, the movie sequel never happened. Going ahead and greenlighting a sequel was entirely based on the sales of that first movie. Unfortunately, Return of the Joker wasn't successful at all, and despite a hugely positive response from critics, the movie didn't sell enough for Warner Brothers to give the go-ahead on a second Batman Beyond movie. Bob Kane is considered the legal creator of Batman since 1939. In those years, the Caped Guys had become an overnight publishing phenomenon. Then Kane got down to work and presented to the publisher his version, a blonde and muscular athlete whom he baptized as the Batman. This first sketch still needed a lot of work before it became the Dark Knight we know today, which is where Bill Finger came in. Finger suggested some of the fundamental characteristics of the character, starting with the mask with pointed ears, which definitively separated the character from Superman. He also came up with some narrative clues: his orphanhood, his millionaire status, his tendency to appear after dark. Kane refused to recognize Finger's contribution from the first moment. Kane demanded to the publisher that his name was the only one to appear as creator in all adaptations of the character, something that was not only false, as there is documentary evidence of this, but also meant a humiliation for all those colleagues who helped him forge the legend of a superhero loved by millions of people around the world. Finally, there are even testimonies from his colleagues, who claim that Bob Kane never drew anything, not even that famous first sketch of Batman, but simply stole all the work and made millions from it. Level 4. Batman Unchained was a sequel to Batman and Robin, and the end of Joel Schumacher's trilogy. According to the source, after the success of Batman Forever, Warner Brothers considered the idea of making a trilogy by the same director. In post-production on Batman and Robin, I Am Legend screenwriter Mark Protasiewicz met with the filmmaker to take the saga in a darker, more serious direction, subjecting Bruce Wayne's character to a more complex psychological state, something Schumacher tried to do in Batman and Robin, but the studio rejected the idea outright. Harley Quinn and the Scarecrow were intended as the main villains. Even previous villains were intended to return. The director commented that he even offered the role of the Scarecrow to Nicolas Cage on the set of the Face Off filming. The first version of the script had a total of 150 pages, where the Batman character manages to overcome his fears and face the demons of the past. The Scarecrow, Professor Jonathan Crane, is bent on carrying out a personal vendetta against Bruce Wayne, while Harley Quinn simply despises Batman. Within the story, it is revealed that the Joker is actually Harley Quinn's father and seeks to avenge his death that occurred in the first film in 1989. Later, Dr. Crane discovers Batman's identity and joins Harley in committing Bruce to Arkham Asylum. In the final sequence, due to a hallucination, Batman is confronted with the faces of his past demons, even stipulated cameos with the original actors from the previous films. That also included Jack Nicholson. The film ended with Batman in a Batcave to prove that he had definitively conquered his fears. We all know Bruce Wayne is the only son of the Waynes, but what if he isn't? At least, that's what was revealed in World's Finest number 223. In that story, Batman, Superman, and Deadman teamed up to investigate murders committed by the mysterious Boomerang Killer. Batman and Deadman's investigations led them to the Willowwood Sanatorium, since the main suspect of the murder had been an inmate of that institution, and they were surprised to find out that it was none other than Thomas Wayne Jr., Bruce's older brother, who, after suffering a serious accident, the after-effects of brain damage led the Wayne family to admit him there and keep it a secret, for his safety and that of the society. Bruce never came to know, as his parents took the secret to the grave. Thomas had escaped from Willowwood shortly before the murders began, and all clues led to him. Batman agreed with Deadman not to reveal the truth and even to hide it from Superman, as he did not want to be taken prisoner. However, Batman and Deadman proved that Thomas was not the real culprit and exonerated him of the charges against him, as they found out that the elder Wayne had been forced by Boomerang Killer to manufacture his weapons. In the end, however, Thomas disappeared, as Deadman had decided to use his body to have a new life. Twilight of the Superheroes by Alan Moore is a miniseries that the writer offered to DC shortly after the publication of Watchmen in 1987. Its approach involved a future world, 30 years or more from what was happening at that time, ruled by superheroes. After dispatching most of the villains, and faced with the collapse of the world's governments, they have divided into different dynasties. In the process, values and beliefs have been disrupted, as the beings who were supposed to be the men of tomorrow have lost their heads. As a result, the capes and hoods divide up the earth, maintaining a weak status quo. For example, on one side would be the House of Steel, headed by Superman and Wonder Woman, while the House of Thunder would obviously involve the entire family of the original Captain Marvel, known today as Shazam. At the beginning of the saga, both houses would unite, causing a gap for the rest, which would obviously be the kickoff to put the future at risk. All this sounds very good, but the saga never materialized. On the one hand, it would hardly be received without objections from the leadership of the publishing house, since it not only questioned the superheroes, presenting dark and adult portraits of some of them, but also intended to review DC Comics' decision to eliminate the multiverse. But more importantly, shortly after presenting his idea, Moore left the company. Even so, DC Comics has recycled several of the British writers' ideas for the saga and even a decade later published a comic book that was set in a very similar scenario. We have already seen how the comic book Death in the Family tells the tragic story of Jason Todd. However, it was not always planned that he would die at the hands of the Joker, but of AIDS. At one point, DC had this idea of giving one of their characters AIDS so they could do an AIDS booklet. Strangely enough, they decided to put up a ballot box and let the people who worked in the company decide who was gonna get AIDS in the DC universe. I tried to stuff the box with Robin's name, and at the end it was Jimmy Olsen who was elected to get AIDS. The entire project was eventually abandoned. Many of you are probably familiar with Andy Warhol's artwork. Visible head of pop art, of which his name is almost synonymous, the multifaceted artist has created some of the most popular works of the 20th century. What many may not know is that he was a huge fan of DC Comics, and in particular Batman, a time when the character and his stories were aimed at children and teenagers, and lacked more adult orientations. Warhol simply loved comics as a vehicle for popular culture, and was fascinated by the darkness he saw in the character. By 1963, Warhol had acquired a Bolex camera in the summer of 1963, and quickly began making underground films of all stripes. All very abstract and experimental, such as a fixed shot of several hours of the Empire State Building, or another of his friends sleeping. A year later he would begin a project that today is almost impossible to find, Batman, Dracula. In Batman Dracula, Warhol decided to explore the parallels between the two characters, and for this Jack Smith would be in charge of playing both roles. Like other Warhol projects, there was no story. Just shots of the actors, sometimes overlapping, filmed on the streets of Long Island or the rooftops of Manhattan. The project was massive. Warhol and Smith shot 7 hours of footage, and still considered the project unfinished. The artist held screenings during his exhibitions, looking for people who wanted to help finance the project. And, of course, the news reached DC Comics headquarters, which soon demanded the withdrawal of the film from exhibition, and the destruction of the copies. Level 5. Gotham High was the concept behind an animated TV show about a teenage Bruce Wayne attending high school with his future enemies and allies. The plot would have Bruce Wayne attend high school with Barbara Gordon and his entire rogues gallery. Each character would have represented a social clique. For example, the Riddler was a nerd, Killer Croc was a bully, Mr. Freeze was the cool kid, etc. The series was cancelled for reasons unknown. Only a few images of the project exist, although it is believed that many elements of the series were taken to create DC superhero girls. Golden Bat appeared in 1966 as an anime, a poorly disguised copy of Batman that even had a movie made in Korea in 1979 directed by Hyun Myung-han. This Golden Bat has Superman-like powers, although he doesn't hesitate to pull off his enemies' heads and laugh hysterically. The plot of the movie is not that complex. Golden Bat is the hero that all the kids idolize, so the villain Black Star ends up kidnapping them, causing the hero to have to help them. Needless to say, the movie was a total failure, as it was quickly compared to Batman. In 1908, Mary Roberts Reinhardt published her first bestseller mystery novel, The Circular Staircase. In 1926, Roland West filmed his first screen adaptation of the mystery thriller play, now called simply The Bat. The story is an old dark house whodunit film, entirely familiar to contemporary audiences. In the story, Miss Cornelia Van Gorder, a writer, rents a mansion where many believe a large sum of cash has been hidden. Among the people searching for the fortune is a killer known only as the Bat, and he could be any one of the estate's present occupants. Unlike in the stage version, in which the criminal wore only a black handkerchief to conceal his identity, this villain wears a fanged bat mask, which results in offering a closer look to a horror film. Surprisingly, this film would be very well received and popular at the time, leading many to believe that part of Batman's inspiration comes directly from this film. We have already seen how Batman is no stranger to crossovers, but the most interesting of them all could never become a reality. In the 1960s, Japan loved the concept of Batman, and in 1965 they wanted to realize a unique project that had never been seen before, a crossover between Batman and Godzilla. It seemed the obvious step for Japanese writer Shinichi Sekizawa to bring two of the most famous characters into the ring. Especially seeing the previous success of King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962. So he decided to create the general concept of the film that could have been. According to Sekizawa's plan, Batman would face the king of the monsters in a spectacular way. Using all of his vehicles and the help of his friends like Robin, Batgirl, and Commissioner Gordon. Apparently there was also some kind of device that controlled the weather, which would be the cause of the confrontation. According to a Reddit theory, it's believed that Bruce Wayne, unable to cope with the loss of his parents, developed the Batman persona in his mind and is a patient of Arkham Asylum. Therefore, the villains he faces are actually doctors and caretakers sent to treat him. The Tim Burton films paint a unique picture, representing Bruce fully settled into his false reality. Gotham City is gloomy and dark, similar to his views on the city that took his parents. He also broods in the darkness, possibly representing his time in solitary due to a violent streak exemplified in these films. Villains like the Joker could have been a doctor treating him due to his knowledge of chemicals and the Wayne's murders, making him the cause of their death. The theory leads into the Nolan films with Dr. Jonathan Crane, who used many methods to help Bruce. But to Bruce, these methods, which likely make him face his fears, only created the Scarecrow. But with therapy and mental health education advancing, the methods have since become more grounded, changing the world to the one seen in Nolan's films. If true, Bruce's sacrifice in The Dark Knight Rises may allude to an escape attempt from Arkham. Ultimately, there are no facts tied to the theory. But unlike comics, games, and animation, the movie universe lends itself best to the idea. The changing iterations represent the changing psyche of a victim like Bruce, and the villains show how hard the system has tried to rehabilitate him. From 1965 to 1992, the Philippines produced a total of 8 Batman films. These were unauthorized and had a more comedic take on the character. Their plots involved Batman fighting Dracula, teaming up with James Bond, going to hell and fighting the devil, as well as a Batwoman and Robin film trilogy, involving an 8-year-old and his mom fighting the Queen of Vampires and the Joker's son. The majority of these films remain lost and only a few posters, scenes, images, and plot details remain. The Joker's one prevailing character trait throughout every portrayal of him is that he's completely insane. Fans have tried for decades to come up with theories to his madness, but one particularly interesting theory suggests that it's not madness at all. the Joker is actually afflicted with supersanity. This affliction is actually mentioned by name in Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum. He sees everything in the world as it truly is, and understands the ridiculousness of a world that worships a man dressed as a bat, a world with penguin-themed criminals and a calendar man. He realizes this kind of logic could only exist in a comic book, which is why he appears so sadistic. His violence only entertains the readers.